And welcome back. So the Washington Capitals, the best of. You know what? The Capitals have had a really good run over the last 15 years. And honestly, outside, they missed the playoffs a couple of times during that period, but generally it's been a pretty good long run at or near the top of the league. And of course, they have the Stanley Cup win in 2018, which means that's automatically, for me anyways, that's the best team they've had. Even though regular season results, they weren't as good as some of the other teams that they have had. I believe it's like 7 or 8 100-point seasons, and they were going to get 100 points again this year. Yeah, they've been pretty darn good for a long while. Now, in terms of all-time points, Alex Ovechkin, 1,278. Thank you very much. Goals, Ovechkin again, 708. And his setup man leads the team in all-time assists with 684. No surprise there. None. Those numbers all match up. That's all good. That's all fine. Penalty minutes, Dale Hunter, 2003. Yep, that's pretty accurate. Hunter, definitely one of the best of the Washington Capitals in their history, but also probably their most infamous. And yet they had Chris Simon on their team too, so we could have that debate at some point about who the most infamous players have been. But yeah, Hunter would probably be up there. Alex Ovechkin, power play goals, 260. That's a lot of power play goals in your career. So Ovi's been pretty good, is the point. As a pure goal scorer, pretty good. As team captain, he does get them to the Stanley Cup in 2018. And he took a lot of blame when they weren't making it before 2018, so he deserves a lot of credit in 2018, which is why he ends up winning the Conn Smythe. You could make the argument that maybe Kuznetsov should have been the guy who got it, but yeah, it's Ovechkin's based on everything he went through, plus he was pretty darn good in that entire run. Now, honorable mentions, Peter Bondra. With the emergence of and the greatness of Ovechkin, Bondra kind of gets pushed to the side, which is too bad because Bondra scored a ton of goals for the Washington Capitals. Rod Langway. Cannot forget that Langway, the epitome of defensive defenseman in the National Hockey League in the 80s. Gartner, one of the most consistent goal scorers in NHL history. And just 30 goals. Just you could book it every year, 30 goals, maybe 40. But he was really, really consistent. John Carlson, who may very well win an Norris Trophy this year. There's some debate about he or Yossi, but either way, Carlson's probably the best offensive defenseman they've had. I'll say Langway's still the best defensive defenseman they've had because I can't say anybody but Langway and feel good about myself. So Johansson's on there as well. That's Calle Johansson. He was there for a very long time, played nearly 1,000 games as a member of the Washington Capitals. Dennis Maruk, a couple of very good seasons there with the Washington Capitals, deserves honorable mention in that he was a pretty darn good goal scorer on some pretty mediocre teams. Bent Gustafson. Bent Gustafson was one of my favorite players during the 80s for the Capitals and certainly was one of the better players for the team when they started to emerge from this darkness that started with their expansion year. Pivonka. Michael Pivonka also gets on that list of honorable mentions for the all-time greats in a Capitals jersey, and there are definitely others you can make an argument about as well. Goaltenders, Olaf Kolzig still leads in all-time wins with 301, and it looked like Holtby would breeze past that. Now we don't know if Holtby's going to still be there next year. That's a question mark that we'll see answered this summer or at some point, maybe in the next 5 years. Whenever we play hockey again, whether it's 2056, whatever it is, we'll figure out whether or not Holtby's still there, but Kolzig's record might be safe. Save percentage, Grubauer, 923 in his career as a member of the Washington Capitals. That's how you get a good contract out of Colorado. And that's how you get a shot at a starting job somewhere. Shots against, Kolzig still leads 19,873, and if Holtby does move on, Kolzig's win numbers and his shots against numbers are safe for a very long time. Now, shutouts, Kolzig and Holtby both have 35. So Braden Holtby, Olaf Kolzig, you can make the argument as to why one is the greatest, and I can't argue against either. I can't argue against Kolzig for the amazing runs he had in the late 90s or against Holtby for just how darn good he was for President's Trophy winning teams in Washington and for their Stanley Cup run in 2018. Even though, towards the end of that regular season, Grubauer stole his job. Honorable mentions, Don Beaupre was a very good goaltender as well for the Capitals as they came out of that darkness they'd been in. Jose Theodore as well. Al Jensen. Easy to forget Al Jensen. And you got to mention the net detective here, Jim Carrey. Jim Carrey came out of nowhere and within a couple of years, he was back in mediocrity obscurity. But hey, what a debut for Jim Carey with the Washington Capitals, and definitely his net detective mask was one of the best we've seen. Jim Carey, goaltender for the Washington Capitals, and one of the greatest flash in the pans I've ever seen. And I mean that. Like, he was just fantastic. Everybody needed his rookie card right away. Everybody went nuts. He was going to be great. Him and Blaine Locker were going to be the future. And then both, like Kaiser Soze. All right. Now, when we talk about their best team, like I said, it's the 2018 team. If you want to make arguments for other teams, that's fine. People are allowed to be wrong. But the team that won the Stanley Cup was in 2018. That's their best team. Most wins against New Jersey. So Patrick Division rival. Still a rival now. 113 wins against the New Jersey Devils, which would include the Colorado Rockies and Kansas City Scouts as well, who they came into the league with. Points percentage against Tampa Bay, 687. That's pretty good against Tampa Bay Lightning. Goals for, they've scored the most against Pittsburgh, 806. The battles between Washington and Pittsburgh, very well discussed over the years, and rightfully so. Goals for per game against Colorado, 3.56. Apparently they score well enough against Colorado, and that's where Grubauer went. Goals against per game, it continues the run. Teams from the 90s expansion and beyond. Minnesota, 2.20 goals against per game against the Minnesota Wild. So the most points they had was 2009-2010 when they had 121. They also had a 120-point season in there as well. The Washington Capitals have been a very well-run, very excellent team that has probably raised the bar really, really high for that next generation that will come in when the day comes that Ovi and Backstrom have moved on. I don't envy the task they're going to have to, keep the interests of Washington fans when fans are used to this greatness. Most consecutive seasons in the playoffs, 1983 through 1996, 14 straight seasons. Before 83, playoffs, no. After they got Langway, making the playoffs got a lot better. And, of course, Doug Jarvis as well, right? Notable captains, Ovechkin has to be on here. Ovechkin is kind of the face of the Capitals at this stage over their history. I'll definitely use him for the thumbnail for this. Connor Walchuk was captain during the late 90s there. Adam Oates had a little time there as team captain as well. Dale Hunter was team captain for the Capitals. Rod Langway, for a very long time, was their captain. Ryan Walter before him, and he was traded for Langway. And Doug Moens was their first ever captain in the National Hockey League. So, really, in all honesty, a team that started out very, very poorly, and by the end of it, they were pretty darn good. Coach, I have to go with Barry Trotz. How do I not go with Barry Trotz? There are other coaches they've had that were pretty darn good. Yep, they've had some pretty good coaches along the way. They've had pretty good records in the regular season. Trotz got him to the promised land. To me, that makes him the best coach. Brian McClellan, I went with as GM as well. And honestly, George McPhee, I know Martin Erat, I know Forsberg, but McPhee, a lot of the pieces that worked for that Stanley Cup championship in 2018, a lot of them were acquired by George McPhee. So he deserves an honorable mention in there. But Brian McClellan did put together the final pieces to get them over the top and get them that Stanley Cup in 2018. So to me, he gets best GM. Now that he was a cap list, Roger Crozier was a cap for 3 games. So easy to not know that. Byron Dafoe was a Capital briefly. Byron Dafoe bounced around a tiny bit there, but he was pretty well known in LA and in Boston. You want to talk about great masks. Byron Dafoe's with the Kings was just gorgeous. Joel Quenneville, he was briefly a Capital. Zach Sanford. It's easy to forget right now that Sanford, who's playing for the Blues, started out with the Caps. And that was one of those trades that at the time you went, we'll see how that turns out. Turned out pretty well for St. Louis. Bill Ranford. Bill Ranford was a Capital, not for an extremely long time. That's why he's under that heading. Trevor Linden was a Capital as well. Before going back to Vancouver, he was in Washington. Jason Arnott. Arnott was a Capital. A lot of guys on this list that I went, I forgot. And that's what this list is kind of about, is I forgot he was a Capital. Kevin Shattenkirk, who of course came over from St. Louis. It didn't work out, and then he goes somewhere else. But he was a good rental for St. Louis while he was there, or for the Capitals from St. Louis while he was there. Peter Zezel was a Capital, not for a ton of time. Rick Tocchet as well. Really easy to forget Tocchet was a Capital. Dave Tippett, coach of the Oilers currently, was a Capital as well. Phil Housley spent about 2 years worth of games, 140 games altogether, I believe, is a Capital. Mike Ribeiro was a Capital. And again, it's that, oh, I forgot. Sergei Fedorov had a season in Washington. So apparently, if you're a famous Russian, yeah, you should spend some time here. Keep in mind, Kovalchuk is likely going to end up on this list at some point, too. I don't have Kovalchuk up there just because we don't know how long he's going to be a Capital. And Brendan Morrison, who did bounce around, and I actually went into his career a bit, and I thought, you know what, I don't know if I've done a Morrison career, but I definitely should, because it's interesting. Because he did bounce around and sadly never reached that 1,000-game mark. But he did spend a year, a successful enough season, as a Capital before he moved on. But there you go. So the all-time best of the Capitals, yeah, it's Ovechkin. And that team that won the Stanley Cup in 2018 was pretty darn good. But they've had some really good teams along the way. They're a well-put-together team, and after Ovechkin does eventually age, because everybody eventually has to, Ovi, or else they're ruled to be immortal, and you don't want to be revealed as immortal, do you? There can be only one. All right, but at some point that torch will be passed, but there are some good young players as well with the Capitals, so we'll see if they end up going into a rebuild at some point or what happens, but at the very least, they finally got that Stanley Cup in 2018, which makes things feel better. So there you go. The all-time best of the Washington Capitals. Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happened upon this video. Thank you guys so much for all your support during this time. And don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons. Like I said, I will talk to you again very soon.